This is Laguna Woods Stories, where we meet interesting people who live here in Laguna Woods. And we have a very interesting guest today. This is Sheila LeCarnier. And Sheila tells us that she was born in
a place called Ballydesmond, a rural village in County Cork, Ireland.
Okay.
December 15, 1929.
1929. So that means that at this taping you are 92.
92.
And looking very, very good, I must say.
Well, thank you.
And so we're going to learn about how a girl born in Ireland happens to have a name that is definitely not Irish.
Correct.
And a little bit about your background. So you were born in a kind of a difficult period of time.
Yes.
Ireland had fairly recently come through a struggle with England over independence.
Correct.
That happened, of course, before you were born. And then 10 years after you were born, there was the beginning of the Second World War.
Correct.
And if I read my history correctly, Ireland was officially not a participant in that war on either side.
Neutral, exactly.
Yeah. So starting at age 10, were you aware that there was a war going on?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, it didn't affect you at all?
No.
So what was life like as a young girl growing up in Ireland?
Well, we were very interested in music, and I went to all the parochial schools and had a lot of lovely little friends. We did Irish dancing after school, where we took, and then walking was big. It was not unusual to walk 7 miles to an aunt's house for summer vacation. Mm-hmm. My father was the youngest of 17 children.
Oh my.
So there were a lot of favorite aunts for all of us, 7. I was one of 7 children.
Where were you in that?
I was in the middle with 3 on either side.
Okay, dead middle, right?
Yes. But music was very big with still is with the Irish people.
Well, tell us about the Irish music. What kind of instruments? Did you play an instrument?
No. I would play piano by ear, but the fiddle and the violin, they called it the fiddle, that was very big. Mm-hmm. My mother played the piano accordion, and my brother played the harmonica.
Oh, okay.
So there was always music in the house.
Now, was this music similar to what you might have heard on the radio or what was currently popular, or was this distinctly Irish music?
Typical Irish ballads, like I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen, Danny Boy, Mother McCree, typical ballads that you'd even hear today on St. Patrick's Day, for instance. And we had a violinist who came to visit us very often. He was we called him the blind fiddler, because we had a pub. There were 5 pubs in the village. And he would play typically. And they have lovely memories of the great fiddlers of those years, and they still have renewals and celebrations for to honor the fiddlers that were popular.
So you, at that point, you didn't have television, of course.
No.
You did have radio.
We did.
Okay. And records, I presume.
And records, yes.
How did you play them?
The big records. There were 33s, I think they called them. There was a handle on the gramophone, and and the needle, of course. And I remember that clearly, playing all those beautiful records.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I remember the same thing. We're at 78s, and when I was a kid, we had a hand-cranked Victrola in our case.
Yes.
To play the music. So, what kind of music did you listen to?
Typically Irish music.
Okay.
The Irish dance music was very popular. The jigs, the reel, and the hornpipe. And I used to do all those dances.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you went to school. What was your school like?
Very, very good. I had my English teacher, in secondary school, which was St. Mary's Finishing School, had a PhD in English from Oxford.
Really?
Very articulate lady. I always thought I'd like to be able to speak as correctly as Nora Sheehan spoke in those years. She was quite good. And when I was leaving that school, she was doing an evaluation of all of us, saying goodbye, and she said, "Now, Sheila, the world will never be a stranger for you." She predicted the world would never be a stranger.
Wonderful, yeah.
I have no problem with strangers.
And these were Catholic parochial schools, I
All
presume?
Catholic parochial, yes.
Yeah. In fact, I think I read that something like 93% of Irish are Catholics.
Exactly.
So
it's probably changed in recent years now.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people that have come in and intermarried with the Catholic girls, and we welcomed a lot of the Jewish people during Hitler's time.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, the Jewish Lord Mayor of Dublin was Mr. Robert Briscoe, and he was re-elected many times. And he had a son whose name was Benny, who went to Trinity College, a famous college in Dublin,
Yes.
who started an organization called the Yiddish Sons of St. Patrick.
Okay, that doesn't
Yes.
make sense almost,
Yes.
doesn't it? Yiddish Sons of St. Patrick.
The Yiddish Sons, my Jewish friends love me telling that story. The Yiddish Sons of St. Patrick's,
Right.
St. Patrick, but they brought a lot of. They helped us economically in that they had the furrier shops and the jewelry shops and the movie theaters and the rag trade particularly. So they were very helpful to the Irish people. Very.
Now, somewhere in your teenage years, you met an American.
I did. I was probably 21 when I met the American. He was visiting, he was on a courtesy mission from Germany. He was stationed at Rhein-Main Air Base in Germany.
So this is well after the war, as it
Oh,
were.
well,
Yeah.
absolutely. But they had a lot of troops in Germany in those days. I think even to this day they have something like 35,000 Americans in Germany. But he was on a courtesy mission, they called it. He was a flight engineer with the Air Force. And I met him and proposed to me on the second date. I
He
was
wasn't
shocked.
messing around, was
I
he?
was shocked at that. I was, yes.
And you didn't say yes on the second date, or did you?
I think I remember saying, I think you must be crazy because the Irish men do not propose like, it'll be 5 years before you might even get a proposal. So, and my sister had been dating an Irish fellow 5 years at that time, so you can imagine how she reacted when I went home that night.
She probably wasn't thrilled.
Yes, no. But anyhow, we eventually married. He became a convert to a Southern Baptist. And since I had two uncles, parish priests, my father's two brothers, it would be impossible to marry a non-Catholic person.
I imagine,
Yes.
a lot of resistance to that back then.
I'd have to explain that one.
And even at age 21, you didn't just do what you yourself wanted to do, I presume. You were.
No.
Yeah.
I had to give that some thought. And 2 years later, we were married in Germany. And he was now a convert to the Catholic faith.
Okay, so that was a big change for him. How did that sit with his family?
Big change. Actually, I would say they probably resented it greatly because Southern Baptists do not take well to converts. But my husband, God rest his soul, he probably knew more about the Catholic faith in that he studied diligently and was very, very, very diligent about all that he was taught.
I think that's usually the case when a person is a convert to a different religion. They learn more about it than people who grew up in the religion.
Precisely.
Because you sort of take it for granted.
You are so right,
You
Tom.
don't realize it could be otherwise.
Exactly.
Yeah. So he became a Catholic, and you were married in Germany.
Married in Germany, at a Catholic church in Germany.
Okay, and he was still stationed in Germany up to that
He
point?
was.
So then at some point you came to the U.S.
Yes, we flew back on an Air Force plane, and he was not a career service person, and so he was discharged at Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, and then we went on to Michigan to see relatives because he had been born in Flint, Michigan.
Okay.
And the grandfather, Le Carnier, would have been born in Paris. I didn't have a lot of info on him, but his father lived then later on in Nashville, Tennessee, and his mother died while he was still in the service in Germany. Yeah.
Okay. So he was a French extraction.
Exactly.
With that name, Le Carnier. And so the Irish girl became French, with a French name, married
Yes.
to an American.
Exactly.
All right. And so you spent some time in Michigan and
Just about a few weeks, and then traveled across to California because his stepfather worked for Convair in San Diego, and they lived in La Jolla. So we came to California then about 3 weeks after we arrived in Michigan.
What were your impressions coming to the United States? You've, of course, seen our movies and
I
all of
was
that.
astounded. The memory that I would have of the lovely palm trees in Hollywood, and I mean, it was just a lot to absorb. Just unbelievable.
What was it? Bigger and better than you thought, or
bigger and better.
Really?
Absolutely.
Okay. So not disappointed.
No. Loved America.
Yeah.
I didn't become an automatic citizen having married an American. You had to go through the green card and all of that.
Really?
And I had the great privilege of becoming an American citizen. And then he worked for Howard Hughes when we came back, because having been, his stepfather was a defense contractor, vice president of Convair San Diego. So, and he knew McDonnell Douglas. And he knew Howard Hughes. So he was in charge of the helicopter program for Howard Hughes.
Right.
Yes.
And so where did you live in Southern California?
We lived in Santa Monica,
Ah.
was our first, Santa Monica. I even remember the address in Santa Monica from half a century ago.
Really?
1337 Stanford Avenue, Santa Monica.
How was daily life different from you in the United States and as a newlywed
Quite
than
different.
what you had grown up with? Because the cultures are somewhat different.
So different, and the cooking in particular. So I took great pride in watching my mother-in-law cook. She was a marvelous cook. And meatloaf was something we never had, or grilled cheese sandwiches.
Okay.
So I'd like to think I kind of was very proud to have mastered the meatloaf.
Okay.
And when I invited the father-in-law and mother-in-law to dinner in Santa Monica, fairly soon after we settled in, I thought, I'm going to make Gladys's meatloaf. And when the father-in-law was leaving, he said, Sheila, it tastes just like Gladys's meatloaf, which I was totally honored by. Yes.
And they were probably hoping for something Irish. And,
Yes, but I gave them the meatloaf.
what would you have cooked had you been in a kitchen in Ireland for
In
guests?
Ireland, probably Irish stew would be, lamb was very big, and it still is very big in Ireland. Lamb is one of my favorites to this day. Even when I return on the trips, I go to a hotel that does a leg of lamb on a Sunday after church. Typically, I want lamb. But to answer your question, Tom, the cooking is quite different. They do a lot of boiled foods like corned beef and cabbage.
Oh, yes.
And
That's about the only Irish dish that I'm familiar with, and I have that pretty much every St. Patrick's
yes,
Day.
that's traditional,
Yeah.
correct.
And it's wonderful. I like it.
It's a very delicious dish.
Once a year at least,
It
it
is.
tastes really good.
It is.
What about breads?
The bread?
Bread that you would,
The bread was usually cooked at home, homemade soda bread with raisins, delicious and homemade brown bread with lovely grains. That, to this day, one of my favorites when I go back. That's one of the first things I order at the hotel, is the brown bread.
And moving to the States, I assume that, like most Americans, you probably ate out more than you were used to in Ireland.
Well, yes, that was always, I was astounded by how many people eat out. But I did develop a very good taste for cooking at home, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. I'd pick up lovely recipes, like I remember for special occasions, Chateaubriand with Béarnaise sauce, stuffed Cornish game hen with pitted Bing cherry sauce. I had lovely recipes that I took great pride in memorizing and could still cook them today at 92.
Did you eat out? Did you work outside of the home? Or
I did.
Okay.
I did. Later on, I had 3 children.
Mm-hmm.
3 children that were 2 years apart, 2 daughters and a son. But in my later years, I took medical terminology and business courses, and I worked in the medical field for about 29 years in medical administration.
Oh, administration.
One of the famous hospitals in Long Beach is Long Beach Memorial Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for 2 of the surgeons on staff there, and later I worked at Long Beach Memorial Business Office. And I enjoyed that thoroughly.
Okay.
Very rewarding
Good.
profession, yes.
You say you had 3 children.
3 children.
And where are they now?
And they are now, one is in Utah, and 2 are in California. My son, very successful in the business world in that he does the trade shows. He does the Long Beach Grand Prix. That's been one of his contracts for probably the last 15 years. And then I have a daughter who works for Residential Design Services. Mm-hmm. She's been with them about 15 years. Very successful, and the work ethic for all 3 of my children is ultra important. I always
and where did they get that?
I'd like to think, even to this day, I can still scrub my own floors at 92. I kind of decline anyone coming in. Even my son is very generous about saying, Mom, we've got to send somebody in. You can't be doing this. But I still take great pride. I tell the story that, Tom, that I won't go to bed if there's a dirty spoon in the sink.
Oh, really?
Sorry.
Yeah, we don't let any little thing like that bother my
No,
sleep. But.
Exactly. But they do appreciate the work ethic, and I'd like to think that's passed on to the grandchildren as well.
Mm-hmm. And you have how many grandchildren?
10 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we kind of skipped over this earlier when we were talking about your education, but what language did you speak at home?
Well, Gaelic was mandatory in the schools.
Yeah.
Mandatory for any government position. It was mandatory, particularly in government positions. But in the home, English was spoken fluently. And there were children I went to school with. If they needed a little brush up on the Gaelic language, there are certain areas of Ireland called the Gaeltacht, where they specialize in giving brush up courses during the summer vacation to the children.
So the children were raised in English.
Raised in English.
As their native language, but then they all had to learn
Yes, it
Gaelic.
was
The government was
absolutely-
trying
To bring the native tongue back. It was ultra important.
Has it been successful?
I would say so. All the streets are named in Gaelic, and you're enrolled in school in Gaelic. And I
Now,
happen
the
to...
government school as well as the Catholic schools, or are
Exactly,
there?
in the government school. Enrolled in Gaelic. My Gaelic name was Sheila Ní Caireen, which was Sheila Karen. And I happen to love the Gaelic language. I even write my Christmas cards with Gaelic phrases to those who understand the Gaelic. A phrase on the Christmas card would be Nalag fe héanas fe vashagat, agus when the bliana shakoing, agus gameramid bio an aumsa arish. Translation. A merry and beautiful Christmas to you and for all the years to come, and that all of us may be alive at the same time next year.
Well, it sounds most interesting in Gaelic, but of course much more meaningful to me in English. So you still have friends and family that
I do.
speak Gaelic, and
I do indeed.
do you chat on the phone in Gaelic?
And sometimes my brother in New Zealand, he lives in New Zealand. He was a great scholar in school, and we'll exchange phrases. I had an aunt who taught 7 languages in Vienna, Budapest, and Prague, my father's sister. So in German, I wanted 1 verse of Silent Night in German.
Yes.
That was ultra important. Stille Nacht.
I know part of that in German.
Stille Nacht.
Having sung it in a choir,
In the choir.
some years ago.
Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, alle Schlaf, einsam wacht. Nur das traute heilige Paar, holder Knabe im lockigem Haar, schlaf in himmlischer Ruhe, sleep in heavenly peace.
So German with a Gaelic accent, probably.
With a Gaelic accent. Exactly.
All right. Now, your husband has passed on, I presume.
He's been dead 42 years.
Oh, my.
God rest his soul.
All right. And how long have you lived here in Laguna Woods?
In Laguna Woods, I moved in after a triple bypass. I had a triple bypass in 2010, and in 2011, in March of that year, I moved into Laguna Woods to get away from the hot desert where I'd been living in 118 degrees in Palm Desert. Was not easy to tolerate.
No.
Right.
Lovely in the winter, not so much in the summer.
Exactly. But Laguna Woods is a beautiful place.
How did you hear about it?
That's a beautiful question, Tom. There was a lady I met in Palm Desert who would rent. She would rent from people who were gone, maybe to Canada or whatever, and she'd rent their place pretty much on a regular basis while they were gone. As season of the year, especially summertime, they went off to Canada.
So they were snowbirds that came down, and then she would rent it for the summer.
Precisely. And she's the one who told me. And so I told my son and daughter-in-law one day it would be lovely to take a look at Laguna Woods. And we have never looked back.
What do you find especially attractive about Laguna Woods?
Well, I think the quiet, the location. I have a downstairs unit looking out at the magnificent palm trees. And I invariably stand inside my kitchen window in the morning looking out and saying, "Thank you, Lord, for all you've given me." The beauty of Laguna Woods is, I think, unmatched. Unmatched. It is. There's a sub-post office there, and the people are rather friendly, especially those who do the Friendship Trail. I get to know a lot of the lovely neighbors.
Where is the Friendship Trail? I don't know that
It's
one.
very close to off Avenida Sevilla, and I'm on Avenue Castilla. So it's from Castilla, it's about probably 1 mile easily. And they walk their little doggies, and they call it the Friendship Trail. I don't know who christened it that, but it's very appropriate.
What are some of the other activities that you've enjoyed since you've been here in the village?
Well, I meet people for lunch. I like to write little poetry. I do elementary poetry. I enjoy the wonderful, they call it the healing power of poetry. And I memorize poems that I learned when I was 19.
In English or
in English?
Okay.
English. When Princess Diana passed away, I did a poem in memory of Princess Diana.
You wrote the poem?
I did. And I wrote a poem about the blind fiddler who christened me Count Corla when I was young, after he passed away. And then I just enjoy poetry. Is very healing for me. And I write. Letter writing is probably something that's skipped a generation. And I still enjoy writing to my brother in New Zealand. I write to Ireland, to siblings.
And I imagine you're writing in a beautiful cursive, which your grandchildren cannot read, probably.
That's true. Handwriting was always one of my pride and joys. My father was a writer with the British Royal Navy, and penmanship was admired greatly in those days. And I like to think I used to imitate my father's handwriting when I was young, and I'd like to think I carried on that tradition of good handwriting. Yes.
It's a tradition that seems to be lost. My grandchildren are not able to read anything I write in cursive. They can figure it out if they take the time to do it. But
it's a lovely talent. I take great pleasure in, and I have a few little journals I'm completing for my 3 children, so they will treasure, hopefully, the handwriting and different phrases that I have.
Now, the Irish are famous, I think, for some of your sayings. Share with us some of the Irish wisdom that comes out so beautifully.
Well, let's see now. Especially about the hereafter, they say, may we all be in heaven a half hour before the devil knows we're dead, and may the good Lord take a liking to you, but not too soon.
Not too soon.
I like that one. Yes,
Right.
yes.
Any others come to mind? We have another minute or so.
Let me see. I have some, like my own phrasing, which the Irish would incorporate, I'm sure, like when they say, Sheila, what's your secret? You're going to be 92. I tell them, use the voice for kindness, the ears for compassion, the hands for charity, the mind for truth, but above all else, use the heart for love. And if I'm giving a guidance to the grandchildren, I tell them, be bold, be courageous, be confident, be discerning in what you stand for, but be careful of what you fall for.
I like that. Discerning what you stand for and careful of what you fall for.
Exactly.
That's
yes.
That's beautifully said. Well, this has been a delightful time for me, Sheila, to meet you. You were recommended to me for this program by one of your neighbors who has a very high opinion of you.
Thank you, Tom.
I'm so glad she did. So we've been talking with Sheila Lecarnier, born in Ireland, and married an American with a French last name, and that's how she got Lecarnier. And eventually moved to California, and the last number of years have been living here among us in the village. So once again, you're a treasure to us all here in Laguna Woods Village.
And thank you so much, Tom. Thank you so much for dedicating this, devoting this amount of time. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.